Thank you, distinguished moderator. And first of all, it's actually my great pleasure to be a part of this platform, to be a part of this distinguished forum, especially since this is my very first time to join this geopolitical maritime forum. And I do agree with my colleagues, with my previous colleagues, that it's actually a great possibility to make a bridge between the expert community of different countries from different regions, and especially dwell upon such burning issues as maritime security and development of the inclusive maritime security architecture in South China Sea, in Southeast Asia, in Asia Pacific, and in the Pacific, and in general. So my take, as you see from the very presentation, will be introduce the China, Philippines, and sustainable development in South China Sea. So is there cooperation or confrontation? And my hypothesis or argument is that despite all this conflict, all these turbulent points in the South China Sea, especially between China, Philippines, or China, Vietnam, we can see that there is still plenty of room of the cooperation and inclusive dialogue, and especially in issues like the sustainable development in South China Sea. So the structure of my presentation will be the following. I'll start with the context of the China-Philippines sustainable development cooperation and coordination. Then I will try to jump to the discussion whether the major security issues are in this specific department, and then I will jump in my finale. I will jump to the recommendations, whether how to develop the inclusive dialogue between China and the Philippines in sustainable development sector. So as you see from the presentation, this is the bilateral track China-Philippines, but it can be easily exported. This experience China-Philippines in sustainable development in South China Sea could be easily exported to more broad picture in the ASEAN countries, and especially those countries who are directly involved in the South China Sea issue, like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. Yeah. So as for the context, it should be said that first of all, the Philippines and China signed a memorandum of understanding (MOU) on cooperation on oil and gas development during the state visit of Chinese President Xi Jinping in Manila in November 2018, when it was the former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. So the both countries, according to this document, according to this MOU, both countries agreed to establish an intergovernmental joint steering committee and entrepreneurial working groups that will negotiate and pursue cooperation agreements for oil and gas development in the future. And so we can see from nowadays, even once again, I will try to emphasize this once again, despite the ongoing conflict or dispute in the South China Sea between China, the Philippines, and many other claimants, which our distinguished colleagues have already emphasized, there's still a room for cooperation between these countries, even directly involved in the South China Sea issue. So Beijing, according to this document, Beijing could only explore and extract resources from disputed waters if it partners with a company that holds a license issued by Manila under the proposed arrangement. So the joint exploration, if successful in finding oil and gas resources, presumably in the disputed South China Sea, would pave the way for another cooperation agreement on the exploitation of resources found. And this is the ongoing discussion in the expert community and in the official community. The agreement highlights the critical role of Chinese and Philippine oil firms, state-owned and private, and their source contractors as enterprise representatives of their respective states. The Philippine-China MOU may signify their readiness to open avenues of cooperation, focusing on joint use and development of the assets of the South China Sea, notwithstanding the contentious issue of sovereignty or ownership of resources. It also indicates the great importance actually, of oil exploration companies and public-private partnership in any future a joint development. A joint development agreement has been suggested as an opportunity for cooperation for claimant states to exploit and share resources such as fisheries, oil and gas, or minerals found within their disputed territorial claims. A joint development agreement will permit claimant states to set aside the question of sovereignty in the dispute areas so as to jointly exploit natural resources. So this point is especially intriguing and important since, once again, the Philippines and China are directly involved in the South China Sea dispute, and especially due to the ongoing discussions of the code of conduct of the parties in the South China Sea, which I hope and believe one day will be signed and implemented. However, the prominent role of state-led cooperation tends to dominate the discussion on joint use and development of resources. Furthermore, recent commentators on the issue are mostly framed on legal challenges, territorial laws, geopolitics, and state-centric security issues. But there have been no, or actually not a lot of extensive discussion on the potential contributions from non-state stakeholders that can make joint development agreements environmentally sound, sustainable, and less political sensitive, and actually less political in general. So these stakeholders are the oil companies, fishermen, and the coastal communities. In the context of ocean governance and management, multi-stakeholder participation is a key element of an effective resource management system, especially since the United Nations Environmental Programs 2017 and later on reports on regional ocean governments makes the accent that the importance of multi-stakeholder participation and public-private partnership in sustainable management of maritime resources is of especially importance. Given the crucial role of the private sector in developing hydrocarbon and marine resources, private-public partnership can contribute to cross-sectoral cooperation as well as consolidated efforts for achieving ocean-related sustainable development goals and other ocean-related targets. A broad spectrum of stakeholders, including from the private sector, should participate in resource management and decision-making beyond the stakeholders. Multi-stakeholder engagement can bring about great transparency, legitimacy, and trust in the regulatory system and can therefore lead to sustainable compliance. Different scholars from different regions, and especially from the ASEAN member states countries of ocean management and resource sharing, explain relevant outcomes on the inclusion of non-state stakeholders, arguing that it's about the higher quality decisions and policies that are appropriate to domestic, socio-cultural, and ecological contexts, institutionalizing mutual understanding and trust, hence lessening conflicts among stakeholders, and the last but definitely not the least, stakeholder ownership driven by support of coastal communities, resulting in successful implementation. In the context of joint oil and gas exploration, cross-sectoral ocean governance is a multifaceted framework in which various stakeholders perform a distinct and critical role in managing and regulating offshore oil and gas activities directly and indirectly. Oil and gas firms, business associations, and standard organizations offer their relevant technical experience, expertise, operating experience, best practices, and standards to help shape governing norms. The involvement of the private sector, such as oil companies, in multi-sectoral efforts to strengthen resource management and sharing is chiefly vital to align incentives and ensure environmental compliance. Since joint oil exploration is to be undertaken by companies, they must be included in institutionalizing standards and best practices on combating marine pollution together with other stakeholders. For example, as in the Arctic Ocean, for instance, there have been a lot of activities among consortiums of companies on oil and spill response technology and mutual assistance in response capabilities. Furthermore, other key stakeholders such as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, academia, and local communities have important contributions to marine environmental governance, such as useful scientific findings, environmental management mechanisms, and other inputs to local environmental law enforcement. Meanwhile, in shared and co-managed fisheries, a community-based approach necessitates active participation of fishermen and local communities in the regulatory and environmental law enforcement. In this regard, there is a robust motivation for compliance, especially since the fishermen themselves are part of the formulation, rationalization, and implementation of rules and regulations meant to protect their livelihood. Addressing the broader issue of energy security is inherent in the proposed dual oil exploration in the South China Sea, with claimant states seeking diversification of energy sources amidst rising domestic demand. Claimant states have three options concerning these huge reserves: refrain from exploiting the resources, exploit them unilaterally, or ink a joint development pact with other claimant countries. So these three major tracks where countries like the Philippines and China or any other claimants in the South China Sea would go and develop this sustainable development cooperation and inclusive cooperation in South China Sea. But in the context of joint development, a purely commercial agreement between companies may be more feasible to execute and arguably may be less susceptible to domestic public opposition than a contentious government-to-government oil and gas exploration agreement. So that's why the recent MOU between China and the Philippines on oil and gas exploration appears to adopt this track, as it encourages the oil companies, state-owned and private firms of the two claimant states to jointly study the feasibility of joint exploration. A commercial agreement and commercial arrangement may appear to be alternative to a formal agreement for exploration between governments, which may be misinterpreted as acknowledging the other country's claims. For example, since 2013, Manila's PXP Energy, together with the Philippine National Oil Company, have been talking with China National Offshore Oil Corporation on a possible joint exploration agreement in the Reed Bank, an immense offshore area claimed by both the Philippines and China is in the South China Sea. The 2018 MOU between China and the Philippines was inked in light of the improving diplomatic and economic ties. Since 2005, the Philippines has failed to unilaterally develop the Reed Bank due to maritime tensions with China, which has repeatedly deployed patrol vessels to the vicinity of the Reed Bank to block PXP Energy's survey ships in recent years. Chinese and Philippine oil firms may also consider to examine existing commercial agreements in the region, such as the joint development agreement between Malaysia and Vietnam and the joint development agreement between Vietnam and Thailand in their overlapping claims in the gas-rich Gulf in Thailand. Embedded in these existing commercial pacts are production sharing contracts whereby the rights of each country to develop and utilize oil and gas are managed by their respective national oil companies like Petronas and Petro-Vietnam in case of Vietnam. Companies can also set up organized management system in the dispute areas, contributing to overall stability in the relations between claimant states, the Philippines and China. The sustainability of cooperation in joint development areas is primarily due to the equitable nature of management system governing exploration and exploitation of hydrocarbons. For instance, the commercial agreement signed by Petronas and Petro-Vietnam in 1993 led to the establishment of a joint coordination committee to manage the joint development areas. This coordination committee, consists of 8 members equally nominated by Petronas and Petro-Vietnam, respectively, with equal voting rights. The other, let's say, recommendation which can be brought and pave the way to the development of the sustainable and inclusive dialogue between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea, especially in terms of the maritime security is the integrated marine environmental protection into joint oil and gas exploration agreements. In this context, in the context of this 2018 MOU and the ongoing agreements between these two countries on joint and oil and gas exploration, Philippine and Chinese oil firms should seriously consider the inclusion of norms and best practices on preventing and mitigating marine pollution in their commercial arrangements and potential joint operations in the future. So it must be noted that existing joint development agreements, for example, between Malaysia and Vietnam, Vietnam-Thailand, and Malaysia-Vietnam-Thailand trilateral agreement system in the region do not contain provisions on the prevention and control of marine pollution caused by offshore operations. The other block of recommendations is about the sharing of maritime resources among the fishermen. As it was stated before, oil companies are not the only resource users in the South China Sea. Fishermen and coastal communities from all claimant states, and especially from the Philippines and China, have a shared interest in the sustainable management of fishery resources. Joint use of fisheries assets in a sustainable manner should be pursued in the form of joint management of fishing zones among claimant states. Joint management can help address various non-traditional and especially non-traditional security issues such as food security, which is a burning issue for Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific, environmental security and the economic security of coastal communities that highly depend on the South China Sea region marine and fishery resources. Another recommendation can be the collaboration, the development of collaboration among fishermen from all claimant states in fisheries co-management that can help address marine environmental degradation that undermines their livelihood. One major challenge faced by all fishermen from South China Sea littoral states is the depletion of fish stocks. Total fish stocks in the South China Sea had been depleted by differing estimations, 70 or even 95% since the 1950s. And harvests have declined by have also been declining as a rate of 15 to 16% per decade. So the fisheries management, most proactive participation of fishermen and local communities can lead to effective management of critical habitats and maritime resources, including fish stocks. Fishermen and coastal communities should proactively participate in the sustainable management and sharing of transboundary fish stocks. Peaceful coexistence among fishermen from claimant states of the South China Sea, for example, the Philippines and China, is not a new phenomenon, actually. In fact, this South China Sea has been a regional common for generation. In the past, fishermen from all the surrounding countries could coexist peacefully and even trade among themselves. But right now, this is especially peaceful coexistence is especially attractive and visible option for these countries at the current time. A co-management network of South China Sea fishermen may be considered to advance cooperation among these countries. We can see this from the experience of the Mediterranean Sea. They can organize themselves into a network, exchanging best practices, ensuring they have a voice in decision-making as primary players in the co-management of resources. This kind of cooperation among fishermen and their proactive engagement in fisheries management must be replicated in the South China Sea. One good model is the Mediterranean platform fishers, a network of fishers, a network consisting of different fishermen in the Mediterranean Sea with members from Spain, France, Italy, and Greece. And jumping to the conclusion. So the proposed joint development of resources and assets in the dispute areas of the South China Sea should not just be about geopolitics, ownership, sovereignty issues, political viability, or legal and constitutional issues. While these issues need to be addressed before joint development can take place, one critical subject that needs to be examined is how non-state stakeholders, like local communities once again, and private companies, oil and gas companies, can contribute to sustainable sharing of resources in these resource-rich waters. It's critical that resource sharing and co-management must be driven by stakeholders themselves, who can commit personal investment, ownership and buy-in to the process, resulting in more effective behavioral change and compliance. Unilateral attempts by claimant states to exploit the resources have only resulted in maritime standoff incidents in the region in recent years, while marine environmental degradation in the South China Sea has been largely ignored. Cooperation among non-state stakeholders from claimant states can help facilitate better framework for joint development and sharing of resources that can improve diplomatic relations among claimant states. Stakeholder participation can also lead to institutionalizing better management system and fair sharing of resources. The complex and dynamic interplay of environmental problems, rising demand for natural resources, and competing sovereignty claims in the South China Sea entails flexible and transparent governance mechanism and collaboration that embraces a diversity of expertise, interests, and best practices and standards, among others. So for this reason, stakeholders' cooperation and participation must be increasing, and especially between the claimants in the South China Sea. So once again, thank you very much for participation in this great dialogue platform. It's my privilege and my pleasure. So thank you very much.